Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be re-ranking 2024 champions. So every time I do this ranking series, I also do the re-ranking of the previous year, because obviously with a bit of time passing we can see how these champions are aging, how relevant they are, how present they are in the metagame, and therefore their placements, in my opinion, in everybody's opinion, effectively do change, because some champions, have been fairly fresh in a contest, or some champions are just aging better than others. All that said, again, please do keep in mind that these are my personal opinions mixed in with the current game relevance and trends. There is no way to make like a super objective list without having an access to statistics and fight analytics and so on and so forth, which only Kabam has. So therefore, there will obviously be personal preferences and subjectivity involved in this list. Therefore, this is my list. You are more than welcome to make your own list. And where we place champions will definitely heavily depend on which game modes we focus on, what type of playstyles we like, what we value in the game, how we play, so on and so forth. That said, I largely try to base my rankings on the meta relevance in competitive game modes. At this time, just about any champion released can do great things in story content or some other piece of content. That is not, in my opinion, what gives champions value. What gives champions value is whether they are good enough to be used when losing matters. So, if they are the champions that we end up picking whenever losing has consequences, they are valued higher. There's a great explanation here would be anywhere in story content, you can pick a Groot and try and do that fight. 20 minutes, maybe you're going to get it done, maybe not. But you can get it done. And even if you lose, you can smash in a revive. It's no big deal. Eventually you can finish the quest or piece of content. You can't do that in Alliance War, because if you wait to death, you lose, your team loses. It's awful. It's not good. You don't want to do that. You can't do that in Battlegrounds. If you lose a match, you lose a match, right? Those are the game modes where winning is not guaranteed. Other ones, you can try again, or just smack in some revives, or, synergize the champion fully, all that stuff. And again, some champions will do better, some champions will do worse there, but ultimately, you can fully play to your own preferences. That's not what we're valuing here. Additionally, to all of that, I also think that nobody needs a rank 4 7-star to do story content. I don't think nobody needs, a rank 4 7-star to do Necropolis or Epoch of Pain. I have a fairly large roster, and I routinely use rank 2 7-stars or 6 stars even for, the biggest piece of content in the game, because you can do it. It might be slightly harder, but it's not like a major inconvenience. What champions that I give my catalysts to, I always try to do for a very specific reason, and that reason is whether that will help me earn more catalysts and materials. And for that to happen, pretty much have to basically just be more competitive. And that is where meta champions come into play. I hope I have explained myself the best I can. And for most part, 2024 was an amazing year of champions. Even the bottom level spots, a lot of those champions I personally like a lot. Some of them I have ranked, even if I can objectively admit that they are on the weaker side compared to the other champions released that year. And that's kind of unique. I think 2024 champions at the moment have clearly 3 worst champions. And there is a gathering of, let's say, 7-8 champions that do specific things well, but overall are just not quite strong enough. And then starting spots, let's say 17 and up, are all like good. So I want to again make that clear. If I do rank a champion low, it does not mean that I devalue the champion, or I don't like it, or I don't understand it. It just means that somebody has to be placed there, and I value other champions higher. Just like when I'm going to be making my top 10 or top 20 lists for each class in the game overall, you can't put everybody there, even if there are a ton of champions that I personally love and enjoy. So let's take a look at the previous list, the original version. As we can see, it went from Silver Sable, that was also pre-tune-up, Deathless Vision, Patriot, Northstar, Deathless King Groot, Patriot Bill, the Leader, Destroyer, all the way up to Serpent Bullseye. I did not rank Isophane, Deathless SheHulk, and Deathless Thanos. They will be ranked this time around. So now you can see how the list looked previously. Keep in mind that if some champion's placement has, been decreased slightly, might as well be the fact that there are just more champions to rank this time around. Right. Let's get to the business then. By far, the worst champion of 2024. Garbage of the garbage. A champion that's truly awful in 2024, 2023, 2022, 2021. Any year this champion's released, he would be considered crap. And that is Deathless Vision. Now, on the bright side, he's getting a tune-up. On the realistic side, he's still probably going to be crap afterwards. But he's just bad. If any regular Vision at this point in time in game is to be considered outdated, not good enough, which all of them are. Like Vision Age of Ultron and, the OG Vision, as we call him. Those champions, used to be decent, but for a very long time, they just haven't been good enough. They're like usable, but just not good enough. Definitely not in 2025. Problem is that Deathless Vision is, in fact, significantly worse than the other two. Like, what we knew Deathless Vision for. Excellent power control always. Good heal block, crappy damage. Now, we have crappy damage, bad power control. That's about it. There's just nothing to him. Even when fully synergized with like all the Deathless team that's like, meant to be powering him up properly, it's still just by far the worst one. Just awful. He's getting a tune-up. I'm skeptical of the tune-up. But let's hope he gets better. But realistically speaking, what were they thinking? It's just so bad. So bad. And as I say that, I understand that some champion will always be somebody's favorite. But there's a funny story of MCOC lore. Sweden, you should know the fact that he's an absolute Vision maniac. He loves all the Visions, every version of Vision, and so forth. Even he made videos talking about how crap this Vision is. And he compared him with the other two that were lower rank, lower rarity, and they were significantly stronger. So, just not good. No other way around it. He's just not good for anything. Right, move on. Patriot, the most famous DLL miss champion. DLL typically creates some very busted champions that we like a lot most of the time, or hate most of the time, but impactful champions. Patriot is anything but. The entire story of Patriot is just kind of ironic, I suppose, because he was advertised to be like basically picture perfect counter to Photon. And he's kind of mid at that. And that is like his best case scenario. He's a bad defender. He's not really a defender. He's fairly slow as an attacker, even in his target matchups, and he does take chip damage still. You are literally much better off using Starhand Spider-Man against Photon, which is meant to be a counter. You are much better off, obviously, using Crossbones and Mantis and a handful of other champions against Photon than a champion that's designed specifically to counter that. So, just bad. And that is in ideal situations. Like, I want people to fully grasp the idea that in his ideal matchup, He's mid at best. In any other type of situation. And he's getting a tune-up. Again, I personally do not have super high expectations after hearing some comments from Kabam employees in regard to his tune-up. Who knows? We'll see. But as it stands right now, I think he's not good enough for anything, really. I do have a dupe 7-star version of him. Obviously, it's 7-star rank 1. I hope he gets good, you know. I'd love to rank him if he becomes good, but he just isn't. Right. I don't want to bash too much on the guy, but god damn, he's bad. Okay, let's go. Spot number 25, I'm gonna give Deathless King Groot. He's also kind of a champion with no real purpose or place. Some people really like him. I have seen a handful of people who have taken him to rank 4, for instance, but for the most part, he's just not needed or not particularly good for anything. He's kind of suffers from a similar problem that Deathless Vision did, just to a lesser degree. Because obviously the identity of King Groot was massive health pool, massive amounts of regeneration, fairly little damage. But he had some redeeming qualities like, purified debuffs, which is fairly rare for Cosmics, access to, permanent arm breaks, which is quite neat. In longer fights, you could do some decent damage. So what I effectively did with him, replaced Poison with Incinerate, which I don't personally consider to be like a good upgrade. Like they did with Deathless Guillotine, where they replaced Bleed with Degen, which I think is a good upgrade, because there are far less Degen-resistant or immune champions than there are Bleed-resistant or immune champions. When it comes to Poison or Incinerate, I kind of would prefer the Poison, to be honest. Or, something else. So, that's fine. That's not here nor there. But they took away his regen, or significant portion of it, and tried to improve his damage slightly. So, where we ended up with is a champion with very, very mid damage. His damage is not awful anymore, and under the right circumstances, you can get good damage output from him. And if you can be super aggressive, if you have some synergies with you, but not as a solo champion. As a solo champion, his damage is objectively mid at best. And now his regen is mid too. His regen isn't, something that you can rely on as much. So, as a champion, he's just kind of there. He's not awful. He's not amazing by any means. And you can do things with him, but I don't recommend investing, many rank up materials for him. Ironically, for the Deathless Necropolis run, he was also the one that was most useless, I think, because in Deathless Thanos, Deathless SheHulk, that did solid amount of work. Handful of fights, Deathless Guillotine, because she had the Nullify and Neutralize with synergies. And for a couple of fights, due to the reverse control immunity and, just the nature of his kit, Deathless Vision. This guy, you could, leave as level 1, rank 1, 7-star, and you'd be fine, because you didn't have to use him for anything. So I think that kind of describes him. You could use him for something, but you absolutely didn't have to. And that story goes for the entire game. You could do something with him, but you're absolutely not missing out anything if you don't use him for anything. So there we go. That's why he's there. Let's move on. Spot number 24. And starting spot number 24, most of the champions I actually personally like, was quite happy to get and have used for some significant things. Spot number 24, I put in Destroyer. Destroyer is a champion that was almost good. Promise you, he was almost good. And I know that there are some people who really like Destroyer. But objectively just speaking, in order to counter him on defense in most scenarios, you just need a champion that doesn't get too many buffs. That's it. And that's not too hard. And I don't mean champion who gets no buffs. I mean as long as you don't, rely on many buffs, you can kill Destroyer with anything. So he's not the most game-breaking defender by any means. He had some defensive presence initially, but now in competitive scenarios, basically non-existent really. Because, once you learn how Dex is level 2 and figured out that you can't really intercept him. There will be specific node combinations where he is a somewhat tricky defender, but in general, he's just on defense, really. And offensively, I actually really like him offensively, but there are a few things that do bring him down. One of them is really like a robot, so there's no willpower, and that's quite annoying in many circumstances, especially in which matchups you can try to use him. But the most important thing is he's just not quite quick enough. His damage was marked in as like 4 out of 5, but it really isn't. It really isn't. He's fairly slow. And it's not that he necessarily does the matchups that, we want him to do. And in a lot of like significant matchups, that lack of willpower, for instance, against Serpent, he's kind of slow there, and the fact that you can't heal from willpower, it kind of ruins it. And again, there are things that you can do with him, and he has some, interesting bits. I do like his level 1, where you have the hinder debuff, then you reduce the potency of like all opponents' debuffs. I love that. I wish we had more of that in the game. But yeah, as an overall package, he's a definition of a champion that I wish got a buff, but he didn't. So I think, ultimately, he's there. Next spot, Northstar. It is a champion that did get a buff, but the problem with Northstar is that whatever he does, you kind of don't need, or even if you do have a use for what he could do, there are miles better options that are better just about everywhere. Northstar, by definition, isn't like a ramp-up champion, right? He's not a good defender. He can be slightly annoying, but he's not a good defender. And on attack, he can be very broken with very big damage output. But, he takes some ramping up to do. And in this game, that's a recipe for like a disastrous champion. If your champion's not great on defense and is ramp up by design, that immediately limits the places that you need him for. And kind of like the final nail in the coffin of Northstar's popularity is the fact that we do have a ton of champions that are great for Everest content and great for much other content. So even though Kabam did buff him and made him slightly quicker, it's just not good enough. So I know there are people who like Elf on a Shelf. I know that there are some specific scenarios where he can be viable for this and that. But for most part, again, you're not really losing much if you're not ranking up your Northstar. And for any situation where Northstar could potentially be good, there are going to be many better champions that will also be equally or almost as good for. So, I think Northstar is a champion that was designed to fail, basically. There was like, in my mind, as soon as I read his kit and I saw what he does, realized how long he ramps up, and we figured out that he's not a good defender, I immediately kind of knew that, he's not going to be a popular champion. Because of the way he was designed, most importantly. So that's where he stays, basically. Now, let's move on to SpiderPunk. SpiderPunk did receive a tiny buff as well, and he did become, better. But again, he's a champion that has some very, very limited uses here and there. And even then, it's not like it's game-breaking. Right? Ironically, as I say that, we're about to see SpiderPunk become slightly more popular thanks to the Battlegrounds Invade meta. Because his Raptures through block on level 2 will do a ton of damage. But again, anything he does, a ton of champions do better. And he has the minigame, which is fairly unique, but to most people probably feels like just an hindrance. And people would learn it if he was like really, really good. But he's quite not. I actually do think he has quite a lot of potential in his SIG ability. And you can do a lot of cool things with SpiderPunk across the game. And unlike Northstar, it's not necessarily only like long-form content. It's, in different areas of the game. But the reality of the situation is, again, whatever he does isn't as requested, not as needed. He doesn't have as much damage as many other champions do. So it doesn't just quite measure up to the standards of 2025. I genuinely kind of like the champion. I genuinely wish he was better. But he isn't. That doesn't mean that, you can't love him or you can't rank him, because if you do, I'm sure you're going to get plenty of value out of him. I have seen some crazy good SpiderPunk footage. He does some very, very interesting things. But when it comes to the competitive play, very few people would entrust their fate to this champion in most situations. So that's why he's here. And now we're going to move to kind of a different type champion. And I'm putting leader just above SpiderPunk. And leader is there because he's quite the opposite to SpiderPunk and many other champions that I discussed here. He sucks for everything. Or almost everything. He's just bad. He's undertuned 1,000,000%. But 90% of the text in his abilities, quite useless. That whole green door mechanic and the furies and much of what else. It's just not good enough. He's another champion that 1,000,000% should have gotten tuned up. He is, however, the best in very, very specific situations. And there will be like that 1 or 2 battlegrounds metas a year where he's crazy good. There will be that 1 or 2 Alliance War nodes where he's by far the best option. Even in 9.2, for some parts, he's insane. And for most parts, you'd never think to use him. And in 9.3 beta as well, for some lanes, insane. And then for just about everything else, you wouldn't be caught dead using him. So there's that one little, there's a very small niche scenario where if there's a lot of power gain or if there's a lot of regen, he can do some very, very cool things. But then and only then. All the other time he sucks. He's a champion that's very, very good to have, but extremely bad almost always, except when he's not. Kind of like Ronan, really. When you can stun lock an opponent, and that has a lot of buffs, there's no better champion in the world. And the same thing with leader. When there is a ton of regen, there's no better champion in the world. When there is a ton of power gain, amazing. All the other time, garbage. And the thing that kind of saves him is, if for whatever reason you do invest a lot of materials in him, he's somewhat annoying on defense, especially in some metas, so, he can be helpful there now and then. But that's also fairly rarely, because he's just kind of fat. And other than that, nothing to him. But he's a type of champion that's very, very good to have. Right, let's move on. Isophane. Isophane's a bit higher, even though she has a fairly similar story to the leader. Just not as extreme. Isophane is the definition of mid. She's just mid. She would be a good champion if she was released 5 years ago. But now, just mid. She can do things, but she's not going to be the fastest. She's not going to be the best. She's not going to be the most convenient. When you need buff control, most of the time, now we have Nico Minoru with buff immunity, or we have neutralize, or we have a plethora of other abilities that will control opponents' buffs better than she did. She will, more timely and so on and so forth. If you need damage, you have way, way more champions with better damage. And if you need just about anything, there will always be better champions than her. But the one design thing that people had in mind when making her was a counter to the Serpent. And she does that amazingly. That's the one thing she's good at. Everything else, mid. There's no other way to put it. She's meh. And again, she's just the type of champion that's not awful by design. She's just undertuned. Her benefits are not good enough. You'd want bigger numbers here and there. Her, percentages are not good enough. Her timers are not good enough. Things expire too quickly, and so on and so forth. Like, you know, you have 100% Wither, but, you know, that's fine. And there are so many champions who have, you know, much better Wither effects. So just about everything about her feels quite undertuned. So the result is a very, very mid champion that Kabam claimed to be perfectly balanced. That's good for specifically countering Serpent. And the reality is that we have many, many better Serpent counters that are more useful. She's one of the better Serpent counters, but she's one of the worst champions that counter Serpent well. I guess you'd explain. For instance, she objectively is better Serpent counters than somebody like America Chavez. America Chavez can do 15 more matchups and do them better than Isophane does. I hope that makes sense. And it's not just America Chavez, obviously. Similar explanations, Kushala. I do think that, you know, she potentially is better at Serpent counter than Kushala, or at the very least on par. But Kushala will do many, many, many more fights and do like them better. So there we go. That's what Isophane is. He's a Serpent counter and mid for anything and everything else. But at the very least, she does have a use and purpose in the game. Move on. Next up, Solar Sable. Now, Solar Sable was previously the most garbage of the garbage. Solar Sable was the worst champion in 2024, but she got tuned up. And she got tuned up fairly massively. Because previously you were expected to collect like 99 or God knows how many of the fervors. Now all of that is reduced to 3, so you can ramp up quickly. Your damage is much better. And Solar Sable is much better champion. Problem with Solar Sable is, again, she's just not quite good enough. Like, what are the best ways to explain it? Anything that you use Silver Sable for, there are significantly better options out there. That's number 1. Number 2, not necessarily easiest champion to pull those things off, and she does have a bit ramp up the playstyle to access his like her full damage, so that's not necessarily the best design, you know. That's for competitive play as well. And then another thing is that when it comes to grounding her abilities, just not working well enough. Like, number 1, she's a champion that relies on shock and shock solely. That is the worst debuff that I have always explained to rely on, because there's a very large amount of champions that are either immune to shock, highly energy resistant, or get supercharged if you try to apply shock to them. So there's like a whole heap of champions that you do not want, can't, and wouldn't try to use her on to begin with. And we do have better alternatives that rely on either better and more rare debuffs, or, you know, we have somebody like Okoye who is shock and bleed, and as long as the opponent's not immune to both, she's going to do well. So there are just, again, anything she does, which she doesn't do enough of it, I suppose you could say. And she's the type of champion, for instance, when I draft my rank 4 Photon in Battlegrounds as well, an opponent has like Mantis or somebody else, I'm not going to throw that Photon down, because I know it's going to get nuked. When I draft rank 4 Photon, an opponent has a Silver Sable, I'll put that Photon down. Because more often than not, I see opponents still end up making a mistake, getting, you know, clipped with Silver Sable, is taking significantly longer than many other champions would. And that kind of still describes Silver Sable. She's definitely playable to a competitive standard now, in her damage and her abilities, but it's just not on the higher end of it. Quite like the champion. She's very fun. Like in questing scenarios, I like to use her, but she's just not at the level that you'd want to chase. So there we go. That is that. Fast Silver Sable. Or Patriot build. Now, I hate Patriot build. We have history. Ever since Patriot build got announced, I was quite hyped because I liked the character of Patriot build. When his abilities got revealed, I was fairly critical and skeptical of him when everybody was mega hyping him. Fine. When he entered the game, many people immediately ranked him up and tried to convince everybody that he's great. Isn't. again, he's one champion that relies on shocks, which in my mind is still a fairly big weakness to a champion. If you do rely on shock damage and do not have viable alternatives, you're going to struggle being a good champion. And that's definitely Patriot Bill. Now, Patriot Bill has actually risen in the rankings from spot number 19, I believe. But considering that there are more champions added. And that is due to the fact that he's quite compatible with the new attack defenders. Like, he can do Sentinel, he can do Zola, he can do a handful of other champions. That is good. But the reality of it is that very few people actually do use him for anything. Like, and I'm hearing angry comments. I know. Horseface is your favorite champion. He nukes everything and stuff like that. But again, for anything that he would be good for, typically there are just better options for. Like, he's meant to have this insane damage for like Necropolis. There are champions that have way better damage that are way easier to play and maintain. Then he's meant to be good like for these specific Alliance War fights, and there are people who do use him for Alliance War. There are plenty of alternate options that are, more handy and steady. With less, timer management stuff. And then even for the new tech defenders, for one reason or another, we, as the competitive player base, have largely decided to just not do anything with the Patriot Bill. Now again, I have seen a lot of crazy good footage, viable option for sure he is. For like Sentinels and, again, a whole bunch of stuff. But we just don't want to use him. And it's not like out of thin air. It's because he's not the fastest. It's because, again, he has fairly limited matchup selection due to his reliance on shocks. Doesn't have the easiest playstyle. And so on and so forth. So again, every champion that I have been talking about since like Destroyer is not a bad champion. You can rank them up, you can do great things, and I'm not trying to hate on them. Except Patriot Bill, screw that guy, and Northstar. But it's just not quite good enough to be higher, in my opinion, because every single champion past this point is objectively like very good and used and ranked up often and so on and so forth. The thing is almost there, but no, he's not there. And you guys will get it, because everybody past this point is definitely going to be somebody's favorite. It's definitely, like, I think every champion that I have past this point, I have already ranked up, bare minimum to rank 2 or 3, most of the time rank 3, and I use frequently. That is the testament of the strength of the characters that came out in 2024. And we can start with White Tiger. She's cool. She's useful. People do use her in like either specific metas, or if you do like her more, you can see quite a few rank 3 White Tigers around. You can see, a handful of rank 4 White Tigers around in competitive play. She does have fairly decent matchups, like Serpent, for instance. A level 2 bleed, quite exciting ability, because when this bleed is active, the opponent cannot heal, and healing denied is transferred to White Tiger, up to 5% of her max health per second. After this bleed expires, nullify all regeneration buffs on opponent. The final hit inflicts, there you go, and paused while the opponent's indestructible. So those are like that's like a clutch ability. She has like fairly unique power control, and yeah, I think she's quite good. I think she is quite good. Don't think she's gotten the meta relevance that Chatra or Enchantress or Spiral or some other mystics have. But ultimately, she's definitely a champion that 1,000,000% has her uses, has her matchups, wish there were more, and has had the situations where she is the go-to option. So White Tiger, I do believe, belongs here. I actually used to have her higher. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that she isn't quite aged the best. But, these things do shift over time, depending what metas are there, so on and so forth. And, actually need to double check the list, but I'm quite sure that she's... Well, yeah. Anyways. Very good champion. Very good champion. But there are better ones. And let's look at that. Ironheart. Now, I hated Ironheart initially, man. I still have this love-hate relationship with Ironheart. I did hate Ironheart a lot because she has a ton of utility, but anything you get out from her, you kind of feel like you struggle a little bit with. Because many of her abilities do not work unless you have X amount of debuffs on the opponent, or if you can, maintain your armor buff and, so on and so forth. But ultimately, it is undeniable how useful she has been across the contest. In fact, if Battlegrounds as a game mode didn't exist, I'd value her even higher and she would be in a higher placement. Because that is kind of the unfortunate story for Ironheart. She's very, very good for everything except Battlegrounds, where she isn't quite fast. The amount of champions that she can do is crazy. She's one of the more versatile champions in the game right now. Because she, reduces opponent ability accuracy when they are hitting your block. So that automatically disables a ton of nodes. Similar to Dust, which by the way is very awesome utility. And then she can bypass miss. She has access to physical or energy dot in between Incinerate and Rupture. So again, that alone kind of gives her much more versatility than many of the champions we discussed previously here that rely on, for instance, Shock. Incinerate, in my opinion, is a better debuff to have to begin with, but having choice in between Incinerate and Rupture, excellent. And you can ramp her up and you can get some very, very good damage going. And it turns out that since she was released, she was also bugged and she effectively got better damage. The one problem is that most of the important matchups, she just quite isn't fast enough, because you do need to alter her playstyle and either go with slow playing or spamming just the level 1 and you can't do the full rotation. And she just doesn't quite have the speed. Like, she can do a ton of crazy difficult fights. Like, you can use her against the photons and enchantresses and Thing and Dust and so far, and like many fights. But for most of the tricky fights, you really do need to alter the way you play her, and that will slow you down. And that ultimately, for specifically in Battlegrounds, is not good enough. But for stuff like Alliance War, perfectly fine, because you can boost up and you can have the power boosts and so on and so forth. And time isn't as important there. And for like questing, amazing. She's one of my AQ champions currently because she counters the nodes better than anybody else. I do the polka dot power rise to power lanes. And number 1, she always has debuffs. Number 2, regardless of which opponents I go up against, they're never going to be immune to that. Number 3, she bypasses miss, so she can, tackle opponents like Professor X and so forth. Number 4, she reduces their ability accuracy when they hit my block, so rise to power node doesn't exist, basically. And she's, like, amazing for a ton of things. That's her biggest weakness. And again, if you are the type of player that doesn't care about Battlegrounds, then Ironheart is amazing for you. At the same time, unless you do it, like, specifically for Alliance War, I, for instance, don't think there's that much of a reason to take her to rank 3. Rank 2 will do just fine. But she is quite cool. I like her a lot. I use her quite a lot. And this is exactly what I meant when all the champions, here are good and have their use in the game. Move on to the next one, and that's going to be Arcade. I kind of wanted to put Ironheart above Arcade, to be honest, but, objectively speaking, Arcade has better competitive presence. Because Arcade is a very annoying defender, especially when paired with some very specific nodes. He is a bit of a meta merchant as well, and he can be very rough on defense. There are some tricks that can help fighting him, but mainly he's kind of like known for his defense. And he does that quite well. He's, quite present in Celestial level. play. He's obviously quite present in Alliance Wars too, and he can be very frustrating to deal with and incredibly tanky at times. His like immunities and pre-fights are quite annoying. He has a bit of that Penny Parker started trend going on for him, where you kind of want an auto block counter against him, and almost all of the auto block counters don't really work because he messes with true effects with his pre-fights. Where is that? True strike, true accuracy, and true sense suffer minus 100% ability accuracy. It's like great, right? He's frustrating and annoying, and you do see him about. And then obviously he does have his offensive use, and he's much better offensively than most people do give him credit for. In kind of like a generic meta, he can actually like take down dominoes very well. With actually, he does have a handful of like fairly specific rotations, which can be very cheesy as well with his heavy spam in the corner, and quite versatile as well because he does have access to. And let's clear it out. He has access to poison, access to shock, he has access to bleed, and he has access to incinerate. And also via level 3, somehow, there is the rupture as well. So, and he has got plenty of immunities. So there we go. He does have some offensive uses, but let's face it, about 85% defender. But he is quite popular. And especially with some meta pairings like Hazard Shift or some other poison nodes, he can be incredibly frustrating and require specific counters. And then, spot number 14, I'm going to give it to Deathless SheHulk. And Deathless SheHulk has fairly similar story to Ironheart, actually. She is amazing for a bunch of things. Like, long-form content, crazy good. If you did Necropolis Deathless run, brutal. Everybody fell in love with Deathless SheHulk for like a week. And then she goes in the closet. And again, you can do cool things with her in most of the game modes. She is obviously a ramp-up type of champion, but she ramps up decently fast. That's not like awful. And she's one of the more successful Deathless champions as well. But they did also kind of butcher her, let's face it. And let me explain that idea that I have been long trying to. She is like 2025 version updated SheHulk, right? And her ramp up mechanic is better, like aggressive negotiations. This one line of text, so when striking the opponent or when struck, he has a 40% chance to inflict, to gain the trauma debuff for X amount of seconds, all that stuff. And then just transfer this bit into OG SheHulk's kit. OG SheHulk would be infinitely better champion. She just would. Because OG SheHulk has better abilities just about everywhere. Like OG SheHulk's Sig ability, where against Science champions, she shrugs up debuffs. Significantly better than this. OG SheHulk against, just about any other champion class has better signature abilities in there. Slow versus Fear. Both of them kind of have their times and utilities, but in most cases, you would 100% want to have access to slow to stop unstoppable and evade over stopping opponents unblockable, for instance. Because, well, you can still strike the opponent while they're unblockable. You can't really hit them while they're unstoppable or evading. So I do think that's, more powerful ability there. Then debuffs as well. Each hit inflicts like, a bit of Spectre or Wither, and it's split in between level 1 and 2. SheHulk just had Petrify. It was more potent on level 2, and you didn't have to choose to help, to control opponent's power or health. So I think specials, there were better. So the one thing that this SheHulk does is she has better ramp-up mechanic. Even damage-wise, SheHulk has more of it, like in longer fight. So, all that said, the thing she does well, she does very well, and that is Necropolis. That is a handful of other pieces of content, and there will be some challenge modes and so on and so forth, where she's quite a good option for, like the most recent ordeal. still not quite good enough for competitive content. Like in battlegrounds, she has 0 footprint. She's just not good enough for that. And then even for Alliance War, I have seen some people. I did the entire Necropolis with rank 2 Deathless SheHulk, and she was phenomenal. And I had a fairly tricky fight in Alliance War where, after discussing it with my officers, I did end up taking to rank 3. She was just garbage for that. In theory, she should have worked, but she was just not kind of fast or good enough there. So she's actually one of the rank 3s I kind of regret most, because I had done everything I needed her for at rank 2. We tried to make her work for competitive content, and it didn't. Like, if I had the rank down ticket, she'd go down immediately. It's not because I don't like her as champion and don't value her as champion. I just don't have any reason for her to be at rank 3. But here we are. Ultimately, though, I do think, you can get a fair amount of value from the sheet. So that's it. That is the beginning of this. The next part might not come tomorrow because I'm going to be out all day tomorrow, but it's going to be the day after. Then we're going to be ranking up the best of 2024. And that's the crazy part, because so many of these champions are already amazing. Right, I'm going to catch you guys soon. Oh, wait, never mind. Haha, tricked you. There you go. There's the new ranking. The Deathless SheHulk, Arcade, Ironheart, White Tiger, Patriot Bill, Silver Sable, Isophane, Leader, SpiderPunk, Northstar, The Destroyer, King Groot, Patriot, Deathless Vision. Top 13 spots. Coming to you soon. Bye-bye. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all